Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
The Theosophical Seal, a study for the student and the non-student, by Arthur M. Kuhn, with an introduction by James S. Perkins. This book is dedicated to all searchers for wisdom. 1958. Book 5. The Interlaced Triangles. Chapter 28. King Solomon's Seal. The symbol of the interlaced triangles, known as King Solomon's Seal and popularly associated with Jewish commercialistic usages, extends the roots of its origins into antiquity. Anciently, it was the key to the most sacred and secret of mysteries, and the search for its lineage leads backward through fascinating and alluring bypaths. As its name would indicate, King Solomon's Seal, sometimes called the Shield of David, is intimately associated with Hebraic traditions, many of which as a heritage have been passed on to Christianity and have been absorbed into its doctrines. The Old Testament, therefore, furnishes a common field of investigation into the sources of these traditions. We find that beneath the many allegories and symbols there exists an inner teaching, which significantly follows the pattern of the esoteric doctrine of all ages. The key to this discovery and interpretation may be found in this ancient symbol. Early in the 19th century, Faber D. Livett gave to the world his Hebraic tongue restored. Through his translation of the original Hebraic manuscripts of the first chapters of the book of Genesis, he brought to light his astounding discovery that the book is not so much an account of the creation of our world and of the human race, as it is a formula of cosmic creation and evolution. This work became the incentive to many of the later critics of the Bible. Within the next century and a half there appeared here and there among the more intellectual churchmen those who added volumes of constructive criticism against a literal interpretation of the Old Testament. This trend was of course in line with the discoveries of modern science. It is not our purpose, even if we had the space, to go into this phase of the subject. We may pause for a moment, however, to quote a sentence from Leonard Bosman's The Book of Genesis Unveiled. In this illuminating and well-documented book, he sums up the conclusions of many writers. He says, the Old Testament stories are, in many cases, myths containing truths relating mainly to creative periods of which the science of geology has as yet no knowledge. The first 10 chapters of Genesis, as understood in the original Hebrew, is a symbolically written narrative enshrining cosmic history and deep metaphysical truths. The conclusion is that the books of the Old Testament were written in a cryptic language, most of them in allegory, some as poetry, some as codes of law, and a small percentage as actual history. Probably the most extremely outspoken of modern biblical students is Dr. Alvin Boyd Kuhn. His exhaustive research into ancient Oriental religious origins and traditions led him to the conclusion that the Old Testament stories were in many instances literally copied from Egyptian, Chaldean, and Babylonian sources. He goes farther than his contemporaries by stating that, instead of geographical places and historical events having been used by these writers as a framework upon which to hand spiritual realities, exactly the reverse is true. He maintains that the names of kings, heroes, cities, rivers, mountains, etc. and events pertaining thereto were on the uranograph long before they appeared on material maps or biblical history. They were, he says, later transferred from the uranograph to the map or were dramatized as factual history. The uranograph thus became a mold or pattern, and the natural configuration and historical events reflect and fulfill the heavenly model. All of this may seem at first glance to be a digression from our theme. On the contrary, it bears record to the corroboration of Holy Writ to our repeated assertion that the pattern in the heavens becomes reflected, or perhaps we should say projected, in the earth beneath. In Exodus 25:40, and in Hebrews 8:5, we find this significant statement, "See that thou make all things after the pattern shown thee in the mount." The word mount unquestionably refers to a state of high spiritual exaltation. Again, in Genesis 2:5, we read this cryptic statement, "The Lord God made every plant of the field before it was in the earth." We touch here the very secret of the creative process. Every objective thing was first an image in the mind of God. As stated in the ancient maxim, as above, so below noumenon is reflected in phenomena. The macrocosm, great universe, is copied in miniature in the microcosm. The reality of the divine world may be seen only as shadows upon the background of the world of material. Every tangible thing has its counterpart or prototype in an archetypal world. More correctly, we should say that the prototype or image in the archetypal world is projected as a pattern into the objective world to become crystallized as thing or action. Among the Hebraic mystery schools, the double intertwined triangle was the sign of this sacred truth. One such school was the order of the Essenes. Among them, the seal of Solomon was a sacred symbol, to whom the word Solomon was more than the name of a king in Israel. It was the personification or symbol of esoteric wisdom. Hence, to the Essenes, the seal which bears the name of Solomon was in reality the seal of wisdom ages before. In India, the early Aryan peoples, in the Puranas, called this symbol the sign of Vishnu, who was the god of wisdom. To the average person today who lives in one of the larger cities, the idea of two triangles intertwined is not unfamiliar. He sees it above the door of school and synagogue. More frequently, he sees it painted on shop and store windows in the Hebrew quarters. If he thinks of it at all, this sign simply spells kosher and is an advertisement that the shop is operated by an Orthodox Jew. To the Jewish people, however, the sign has other meanings. It tells them that through certain ritualistic observances dating from the days of Moses, the products to be sold over the counter have been cleansed of certain impurities. The practice of blessing or of exorcising objects by means of invocations or prayers combined with prescribed physical rituals is as old as religion itself and needs no vindication. The student of the inner side of things recognizes that every object, animate or inanimate, has an etheric counterpart. The function of this etheric field is to be a channel or conveyor for certain types of force, and it is through this field that the ritual of exorcism or blessing operates. The point to be emphasized here is that the seal of Solomon among the Hebrews has a deeply religious significance. In our day, the sign of the intertwined triangles has appeared upon the flag of the newly born state of Israel. Born, or reborn we should say, out of tragedy and conflict, the future alone holds in its hands the destiny of this new old nation. The shield of David, as its chosen emblem, becomes the link between the heritage of its traditions and the hope of future glory. Like every other great faith, the Hebrew religion had its exoteric teachings for the many and its esoteric teachings for the few. Its popular teachings, based upon the laws of Moses and the Ten Commandments, are expressed through codes of morals unequaled in the history of religions for their purity and strictness. The one dominant note, repeated again and again, is that there is one God and only one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, but behind this simple statement, there lies a body of secret teachings, markedly akin to the esoteric wisdom of the past. During the Dark Ages in Europe, these traditions were studied and preserved by a group of esoteric scholars, both Christian and Jew, who became known as Kabbalists. Sometime later, although the dates of their authorship is widely speculative, these doctrines appeared in such arcane works as the Zohar and Sefer Yetzirah. The great obstacle confronting the modern student of ancient Hebraic traditions is the difficulty in correctly translating the characters of the alphabet. As D. Livett points out in his Hebraic Tongue Restored, these characters differ from the letters of all modern languages in that each letter represents an idea in itself, perhaps several, according to its usage. A Hebrew word may be a composite of related ideas, requiring a sentence, often a treatise for its full elucidation. As stated above, the very essence of the Hebrew religion is monotheistic. So sacred has been this belief that it has been held as a truism that no man has ever seen God's face and none can pronounce his name. He is known as Ein Sof, the limitless, ever-expanding or emanating deity. Ein meaning nothing, he is nothing, nameless being the Sanskrit word for him is Parabrahm, that is, beyond Brahma. The ancient Aryans called him the absolute or universal, nameless principle, sometimes interpreted as that which is behind even the first principle of being. He, or it is the unmanifest, even in the highest spiritual sense, and yet contains within himself the potentialities of all being and all manifestation. Ein Sof, being naught, contains all numbers. It is the invisible and omnipresent point from which all forms proceed, and it is the infinite circle within which all forms exist. It is, if the finite mind can conceive the term, the causeless cause. It is the infinite source of all manifestation, or as the Kabbalists would prefer to express it, of all emanations. The mind gropes for words with which to describe it. From Ein Sof proceeds Kether, the first emanation or principle of being. Kether literally means crown and represents divine will. He, or it is the highest of the 10 Sephiroth and forms the first supernal triad. From Kether, the creative process is set in motion. Kether, which on its own level is pure spirit, appears in a descending order as two, Chokmah and Bina. The one is differentiated, as it were, into two. Chokmah is the positive principle and represents divine intellection or the active potency of deity. Bina, on the other hand, is passive and represents the generative principle or intellectual producing capacity. Here is projected the first trinity, Kether Chokmah Bina, or to restate it in modern form, divine will, divine wisdom, and divine mind or understanding, forming the supreme triangle still on a heavenly or cosmic level. These Hebraic terms are not to be interpreted as deities or gods so much as potentialities or emanations of deity. However, when we say that from naught there emanates the one, and that the one differentiating into two becomes three, it must not be understood that this process is accomplished in steps, one following another, as we would think of it, in time, but rather as a simultaneous becoming. Moreover, it must be emphasized that the Kabbalistic idea of the universe is not that it came into being through a creative process as we usually understand the term, that is, in the sense that God produces something out of nothing, or something outside of himself, but that his creation is an emanation of himself, a crystallization, as it were, of a certain aspect of his own being. To the Kabbalists, the lower worlds did not come into being through mechanical processes. Creation is a generative process by which the higher or more spiritual begets or projects the lower or more material. The divine order is not reflected in the lower as though they were two separate and unconnected things. The lower or denser is an emanation of the higher or spiritual, a projection of it in time and space. And so from the Supreme Trinity, Kether Chokmah Bina, there emanate, in a descending order, 7 creative hierarchies. These 7 together with the 3 become the sacred Sephiroth. What figure known to man can so adequately express the profound implications of this process, or the many relationships proceeding from them, as the Seal of Solomon? Besides these relationships, there is contained within the seal the idea of a complete and ultimate union. For as the one becomes the many are contained within it, and they eventually restore that unity. The intertwined triangles thus become an inexhaustible symbol, not only of an eternal process but also of an unchanging state of ultimate being. The eye of the imagination might visualize a series of triangles thus intertwined and superimposed, one upon another, expressing this interrelationship of principles and powers. Picture then our supreme triangle with Kether at its apex and Chokmah and Bina forming its base. From the union of these two latter principles there appears a new principle which is given the name Dath, and is interpreted as divine intellection or truth. Dath therefore becomes the nadir of this second triangle, and the apex of a third for Dath or truth is in turn differentiated, split as it were into the two qualities called Gibura, which is justice, and Gedula, which is benignity. These two qualities or principles become the base of this third triangle. The process is again repeated. As in the case of Chokmah and Bina above, Gibura and Gedula unite, and from their union proceeds Tefereth, which is interpreted as beauty or universal harmony. Once more there follows a differentiation in the one becoming two. From Tefereth descends, or rather proceeds, Hod and Netzach. Universal harmony appears as glory on the one hand and victory on the other. Hod and Netzach, glory and victory, are united to form the final triad with Yesod as the point of union. Yesod is described as foundation and stability, representing the quality of permanency and manifestation. The 10th Sephiroth is Malkuth, which may be interpreted as the kingdom if we could represent these triads as planes in a cosmic scheme. The first would be the divine plane of formless spirit, next the archetypal world, then the intellectual or creative world. Fourth, the substantial or formative world, and finally the physical or material world. Malkuth is by some scholars associated with this, the lowest world. In another sense, Malkuth is called the Shekinah, the veil of Ein Sof, the veil of earthly things which completely hides the absolute. We have scarcely touched the hem of the garment of Kabbalistic mysteries. King Solomon's seal, or the seal of wisdom like the Hebraic language, is universal. Out of this sign, as out of the word, come many shades of meaning, many interpretations. It is an inexhaustible fountain of knowledge. The purpose of these all too sketchy paragraphs will have been accomplished if it will have served to lift, ever so slightly, the veil which conceals the wisdom of the ages.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.